Let's jump into the fascinating world of Pliny the Younger and his curious connection to early Christian history, specifically how his letter raises intriguing questions about the historicity of Jesus.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting intersection between legal records and historical narrative.
So starting off, Pliny the Younger, or Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, was a Roman lawyer, author, and magistrate who lived approximately from 61 to 113 CE. His letters, provide vivid snapshots of life in the Roman Empire, including dramatic events like the eruption of Vesuvius and, crucially, early Christian practices.
Right, and one letter, in particular letter 1096, really stands out because it offers the earliest non-Christian reference to what we now call Christianity, correct?
Exactly, that's the crux of it. In that letter, written around 112 CE to Emperor Trajan, Pliny describes how Christians would meet before dawn to sing hymns to Christ as if he were a god. This account gives us a glimpse into early Christian worship, even though it doesn't dive into details of Jesus' life itself.
So just to be clear, he's noting that the believers worshipped a figure called Christ without necessarily discussing Jesus of Nazareth or his biography?
Right, and that's a key point. Pliny's account confirms the existence of a group of Christians in Bithynia, where they honored a figure referred to simply as Christ, and they even took an oath to abstain from theft, robbery, and adultery. But notice, he never dives into any specifics like the crucifixion or resurrection.
That's interesting because it leaves room for debate on whether this Christ was the actual historical figure or just a symbolic figurehead.
Exactly. And that's why Christian apologists often argue that this independent, non-Christian document supports the historicity of Jesus. Basically, if people were worshiping a Christ within 80 years after his supposed crucifixion, he must have been a real person who inspired a movement.
But then skeptics, like some mythicists, say that this only confirms the existence of a belief system. They point out that Christ is just a title meaning anointed one, and doesn't necessarily prove the detailed life events of Jesus.
Absolutely, and that's the debate in a nutshell. It's like, when someone admires an idea or a slogan without really getting into all the gritty details, Pliny's letter is evidence of the worship, but not conclusive evidence about the historical Jesus as a person in every biographical sense.
Right. Speaking of context, Pliny's background as a Roman official means that his letter was written for legal reasons, to get guidance on how to handle this new movement. That gives us, an outsider's view on early Christianity.
Exactly, and that's what makes his account so valuable. It's not a gospel or a Christian text. It's a report from a Roman administrator noting, in a legal context, something that was seen as both unusual and, frankly, a bit of a nuisance.
And then there's Pliny the Elder, his adoptive father, right? He was a renowned naturalist and author who died during Vesuvius's eruption in 79 CE, but he never mentioned Christianity in his writings.
That's correct. Pliny the Elder was a towering figure in his own right, famous for his work, Natural History. His life and writings, however, remind us that Christianity was still a pretty fringe element during his time.
Sure thing. So, Pliny the Younger's discussion of the Christians comes from a period when the movement was just starting to become noticeable, and his tone, as I recall, was somewhat dismissive, calling the beliefs depraved and excessive superstition after some even torturing of deaconesses.
Right, the language he uses certainly isn't complimentary. He's basically reporting what he observed, and it seems his primary concern was the legal and social implications rather than the doctrinal aspects.
Yeah. Now, considering historians like Bart Ehrman, they argue that this non-Christian source is strong indirect evidence that a remarkable figure named Christ sparked a real movement. But not everyone is on board with that interpretation. Is that so?
Exactly. Historians see it as an important piece in the puzzle, asserting that it indirectly supports the existence of Jesus as a founder figure. But then critics, like Richard Carrier and others, say, hold on a minute, this isn't direct evidence of Jesus of Nazareth himself. It's just confirmation that people worshipped an idea, a name, Christ.
I appreciate that perspective. It really brings up the challenge of how we distinguish between the existence of a belief and the historical footprint of an individual behind that belief.
Yeah, it's like trying to separate the myth from the man, you know? When people use Christ interchangeably, it can get murky. The debate raises the question, does the existence of a religious practice confirm a historical figure, or does it merely attest to the power of an idea?
And interestingly, Pliny's legal tone gives us a perspective from the Roman bureaucracy, which adds a layer of impartiality, even if he was just trying to manage a nuisance.
Precisely. It's the fact that as a Roman magistrate, Pliny wasn't writing a theological treatise but a legal inquiry, which makes his observations appear more objective.
Sure, yeah. One point that's often raised is that because Pliny never talks about miracles or Jesus' teachings, his account is limited in what it can offer to the historicity debate. Would you agree?
I would. It's like he gives us evidence about the phenomenon, the worship and communal practices, but stops short of providing, say, eyewitness testimony on Jesus' life events. So it leaves us, well, somewhat divided on how concrete the historical proof really is.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it fascinating how these small details can shape broader historical narratives? On one hand, his letter confirms that early Christians saw Christ as divine. On the other, it tells us little about the actual biography we might expect of a historical figure.
Exactly. It's like having a snapshot versus a full-length documentary. The snapshot is valuable but doesn't tell the whole story, you know?
Right. Now let's take a moment to discuss the criticism. Why some argue that Pliny's account should be read cautiously. Some point out that since Christ is a title, we aren't exactly sure if he refers to an actual person or a mythologized representation.
Absolutely, and that's a solid critique. It's like if you hear someone talk about the hero of a story, you might not know if they mean an actual person or a composite of traits. The ambiguity of the title Christ means this letter supports the idea of early Christian worship, but doesn't nail down every detail about Jesus' historicity.
I see. So would it be fair to say that Pliny's letter, while important, remains a piece of evidence that must be weighed alongside other historical sources and archaeological findings?
Definitely. It's a critical piece, but it shouldn't be seen as the single decisive proof. It's part of a larger mosaic that includes other early texts, extra biblical sources, and even later writings that together help us piece together the past.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key takeaways is that early Christian identification with Christ as divine was already present by the early 2nd century, as confirmed by this non-Christian record.
Right, and that already tells us that there was a significant religious phenomenon going on, one that had a lasting impact and which was noticeable to Roman officials.
Totally. Yet, it seems to me that the debate is far from settled. Whether Pliny's account definitively supports the historical existence of Jesus or just the spread of a compelling religious idea remains very much an open question.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so engaging. It invites us to look deeper into primary sources and weigh legal commentary against myth, speculation, and later traditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I also find it interesting how this conversation underscores the importance of context. Pliny's words were meant to resolve policy and legal dilemmas, not to serve as a historical biography.
Right, and in that role, his observations have an unintended benefit. They offer an independent reflection on how early Christians were viewed by the state.
Indeed. So, in a nutshell, Pliny the Younger's letter remains a fascinating glimpse into early Christian worship, and, by extension, a tantalizing piece of evidence in debates about the historical Jesus, even if it leaves plenty of room for interpretation.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle piece that sparks further inquiry, urging historians and scholars to combine it with other evidence to form a richer picture of early Christian history.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what keeps these discussions alive and continually evolving. Thanks for breaking that down. Definitely a topic that makes you think about the nature of historical evidence and its interpretation.
Absolutely. It reminds us that history is as much about the stories we unearth as it is about the questions we continue to ask. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring.